I think our intellectuals and so-called political analysts and even political leaders paint a very theoretical picture about the relationship we think we have with the United States of America. Here is an interesting interview here between Xoli Mngambi and this brother. I think his name is Simon. I will verify that later. It's a very interesting interview because I think we need a reality check. I don't think we are being realistic about the relationship we have with the United States of America.
Let's talk South Africa and the continent, because just as this election is consequential for Americans, it has implications for the rest of the world. And where I come from, South Africa, they obviously are watching this with keen interest. In fact, talking about this just yesterday, the head of international relations saying that they wish Americans well. They have no particular interest in who occupies the White House. South Africa's interests, though, are what is important here. How do you think, let's start with a Trump administration, how will it relate to South Africa and the continent?
Well, let's be honest. I mean, really honest. Donald Trump does not care about Africa at all. He has no particular interests there. He has spoken scatologically in the past about Nigeria. He has evinced very little interest in South Africa or in any other part of the sub-Saharan region. But for a government led by Cyril Ramaphosa in South Africa, and for any other government around the world, there is always opportunity with Donald.
Of course, he had to throw in a promo for Ramaphosa right there. But let's continue.
Trump. Because everything with Donald Trump is transactional. So if you can find a way of catching his attention and persuading him that there is some sort of transactional benefit to the United States is going to benefit financially from an improved bilateral relationship with South Africa, that's the magic lever that you have to pull. The difficulty, I think, for the South African government, and we've seen other governments scrambling to do this in the last several months, is going to be to build bridges to Trump world if he gets in, because he's not going to be bringing career diplomats or foreign service officials into the State Department or the National Security Council. These are all going to be dyed-in-the-wool Make America Great Again loyalists.
It's going to be an interesting dynamic, though, Simon, if Kamala Harris is the person that occupies the White House, because the Biden administration is unwavering in its support for Israel, for example, throwing resources.
Of course.
Indeed. However, South Africa's comments at the recent BRICS summit, where the president of South Africa says this was a bilateral between him and Putin, Russia and President Putin are a friend and ally. Would that upset Kamala Harris?
It's a problem. I mean, let's be honest about the bilateral relationship between South Africa and the United States. It is not what it was. It is not even what it was when President Ramaphosa visited Joe Biden in the White House not that very many months ago. And it has been damaged partly over Ukraine. There is a failure in this city to understand why a South African government feels such loyalty to Vladimir Putin, given that the Americans do not believe that Vladimir Putin is a Soviet, and it was the Soviet Union, including Ukraine, that provided assistance to the ANC back in the apartheid era. They view here Vladimir Putin as a Russian nationalist. They don't think he's trying to put the old band back together again. They think he's trying to conquer other lands. So it bemuses them that the South African government wants to have such a warm and friendly relationship with Vladimir Putin. But it's not only South Africa that's in that boat, as we saw in the BRICS summit. I mean, at the BRICS summit, the leaders there were speaking for 45% of the world's population. And the United States continues to struggle with the notion that its own influence on the world stage, particularly in Africa, is evaporating, being diluted by China's focus on Africa, China's focus on other parts of the world, and Russia's as well. So these are really complicated issues that the government in South Africa is going to have to deal with, regardless of who is in power here. If it's Harris, you're going to get more continuity in terms of tone and style and substance from the Biden administration. If it's Trump, it becomes completely transactional.
Simon, I want to close off with this question around whether or not we are going to see a US-Africa policy that sees each other as equals. Well, we may not necessarily be equals, but it's a question of, do you respect me much as I respect you? And I'm saying this because there is a complaint that as much as it was America in the United Nations that endorsed for the continent to occupy 2 seats in the Security Council, it's not nearly enough because
of course
the powers, the veto powers, will not be given to those 2 African states that will sit there. And so it is a the view is that it is not an endorsement as such, because the 2 states from Africa are going to be some kind of a junior partner in the Security Council simply because they don't have veto powers.
Well, I was smiling because I thought you were going to ask me who was going to win the election. The reality in terms of that relationship with Africa, and particularly with regard to reinventing the architecture of the international system in the United Nations, is that the United States is very, very late to that discussion. And the United States has not, under successive administrations, really focused and created a strategic plan for its relationship with Africa. You'd actually have to go back, oddly, in some ways, to the presidency of George W. Bush to find a president of the United States who focused to such a degree and understood that America had interests in trying to assist Africa and trying to uplift Africa. We've just not seen that at all. I always sit through the State of the Union addresses every year, and I don't think in one of them, certainly not in the last 2, has Joe Biden ever used the word Africa. He's never referenced the continent in the State of the Union address, not even a name check for a continent. And that is pretty astounding. It speaks volumes about the extent to which the United States has taken its eye off the continent, has allowed the Chinese really to deepen their relationships with African nations, the Russians as well, and now they're playing a massive game of catch-up here. But so many other pressing problems on the agenda for a new American president: the economy, immigration, abortion rights, climate change. All of these issues inevitably come, sadly, to crowd out the necessary focus that many African governments, including South Africa, would like to see.
Indeed, America has lots of its own problems to deal with, much less what the world is trying to also get out of America. Simon Marks, thank you very much for the time being. All right, Naledi, that...
Anyway, feel free to participate in the comments below. I'd really like to know your views on this. I really want to know what you think about it, because I feel like our view on the relationship that we think we have with the United States of America is a little warped somehow. So yeah, I could be wrong. I just need to know your views. Comment below.